not to aid the Confederacy during the Civil War. Please welcome Greg.
The Union, which could also be called the North, had some major advantages in the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, over the Confederacy, which you could also call the South. Some of these advantages included a larger loyal population, more of every type of resources needed to sustain a war, and also a better civilian and military government. One shouldn't ask why the North won the Civil War, but was it even possible for the South to win? The answer is yes. They had two possibilities. The first was for them to be able to utterly annihilate a Union army on the battlefield, a feat which was never accomplished. The second possibility was for them to receive a significant amount of aid and possibly even a military alliance with a major European power, most likely Great Britain or France. That did not transpire either. The purpose of this speech is to explain why Europe chose not to aid the Confederacy. In fact, they never even recognized the Confederate States of America as a sovereign nation. The first reason was their antipathy towards slavery. Great Britain abolished slavery in their colonies in the West Indies in 1838, and the French followed suit 10 years later. After the Emancipation Proclamation was ratified on January 1st, 1863, which abolished slavery in those 11 southern states, the war had slavery as an official aim. That took much of the wind out of the diplomatic sails of the Confederacy. The second reason was Europe's opposition to secession movements. If they recognized the Confederacy and essentially told the South, we will help you secede from the Union, that would give many of their own subjects who might be of a different nationality than the ruling elite the wrong message. For example, it gave Great Britain the collywobbles to even consider the idea of giving Ireland an excuse to have another rebellion, and maybe this one might work. The third reason was economic. The South bet big time on their so-called King Cotton diplomacy, and it failed miserably. Cotton was a valuable export at that time. In the very beginning of the Civil War, the Union imposed a blockade along the southern coastline. Rather than try to run that blockade to the West Indies where they could pick up supplies to sustain their war efforts, the South, gambling on King Cotton diplomacy, refused to do that. If Europe wanted that cotton, then they would have to sail to southern ports like Savannah or New Orleans and get it themselves. That might put them into conflict with the Union's fleet and bringing about a war. Britain and France could very well be dragged into the conflict in that way. Under different circumstances, it very well might have worked. But in 1860, the year before the Civil War, the South grew more cotton than ever, exported more cotton than ever, and Europe had a stockpile of cotton. They did not need to do that right away. And as the war progressed, they were able to encourage people in Egypt and India to grow more cotton, so they got enough cotton from other markets. It did not work. On the other hand, the Union got lucky with their so-called king wheat diplomacy. It just so happened that there was a major drought in Europe in the early 1860s. They had a famine. They purchased a great amount of grain, such as wheat, corn, and oats, from northern states. That had the added benefit of enabling the Union to finance the war, or at least partially finance it through that revenue. It kept the Union's economy afloat during the war. On the other hand, they had real diplomatic leverage over Europe. If you get too friendly to the South, we'll quit selling you that grain. That king wheat diplomacy did work. There's two quick reasons involving Great Britain. For one, Canada was still a British colony. If they went to war with the Union, then we might invade Canada. Also, Charles Francis Adams was our minister ambassador to Great Britain. He was the son and grandson of presidents. He soothed over many diplomatic crises. The final and most important reason is the South did not win. They never scored that decisive battlefield victory. All Robert E. Lee did in Virginia was merely parry one Union thrust after another. The Union Army of the Potomac could withdraw to Washington, regroup, and invade again and again until it worked. Had they crushed the Union Army, then Europe might have intervened, like how after Benedict Arnold won the battles of Saratoga in 1777 during the Revolution, first the French, then the Spanish, then finally the Dutch took our side. Nothing like that happened during the Civil War. Also, if the South won the Civil War outright, and then Europe would have had no choice but to recognize the Confederate States of America as a sovereign nation. But fellow Toastmasters and honored guests, that did not transpire. Thank you.